Welcome to an episode of InRange, although welcome is not really the word for this video because this topic's kind of a bummer. This is about an issue that has plagued not only KE Arms and Brownells, but InRange now for years in regards to the What Would Stunner Do project. And it's not even a problem just for that, it is indicative of the problem with the system as a whole. And I think you're going to see that as we go through this discussion. But I've got notes down here on a laptop, so you're going to have to bear with me when I look down because I want to make sure that I get this right. It's a complicated topic that's gone on for years, and I want to make sure I represent it properly in this video. But it's time now to really let the audience as a whole know some of the things that have gone on with the What Would Stunner Do project and why you've seen delays and issues and things that weren't necessarily explicable, as well as a diminished amount of content on the channel as a result of these situations and this issue. But so let me start with the basics if you're not familiar with it. The What Would Stunner Do project started in 2017 in my backyard. I went on a trip to Utah and went to a local gun store and found a Colt SP1, one of the original pencil barrel guns, and bought it. It was a great deal and started shooting it, and I was like, really had this epiphany. I was like, what happened to the AR-15? The AR-15 used to be this light, handy carbine, and it is no longer a light, handy carbine. If you're familiar with the M4 or any of the modern derivatives, they're pretty heavy compared to what the original designer's goals were, which of course was Eugene Stoner and et al. So, so when shooting that, I was like, what happened to the AR-15? And then Ian was still more actively part of the project here because he had the time with Forgotten Weapons not being quite as big as it is now as in his book projects. And we had a conversation. I was like, what if we were to try to bring the AR-15 back to its original roots, like where it started? The idea of where did this, we know where it started with Eugene's goals, at least initially, and now we see where it is today. But if we took his original concept of modern manufacturing and materials and applied it in 2017 and tried to make the AR-15 that he would have potentially made in 2017 that he made way back, or started to way back in like as late as the late 50s and early 1960s. Same idea, modern materials, modern manufacturing, lightweight, handy carbine. Now, we weren't trying to speak for Eugene Stoner. That's one of the things that we've seen people kind of give us flack about. It's like, how could you dare speak for Eugene Stoner as though he's some sort of patron saint? And he's definitely a very talented engineer, but he wasn't the only one involved in the project. You have Jim Sullivan and others as well. But so for that matter, maybe this is What Would Sullivan Do project, but Eugene Stoner's the one that's really known for the AR-15. So we started going down that path, and it was a really cool DIY project, do it yourself. We started looking at every manufacturer in the market and trying to figure out where was who epitomized the most modern materials and manufacturing processes when combined would be that modern AR-15. And of course, as you saw the project evolve, we landed up initially with a Faxon pencil barrel where the heat treatment had been done properly, and now a pencil barrel wasn't the issue that it was in the 1960s, 70s, etc. We landed up with a carbon fiber free flow tube, also via Faxon. We ended up with an SLT1 trigger, which allowed you to put it on safe whether the hammer was down or up, and also was an excellent trigger from KE Arms, who's an association because I'm friends with Russell Fagan, who worked at KE Arms. And we have a PDQ lever, and we went with an ambidextrous mag release, and all of these things combined, along with the GWACS Mark II lower, which we're going to get more into about, which is a monolithic polymer lower, to make a really amazing sub 6 pound carbine that really, in my opinion, achieved the goals of what the original AR-15 design parameters were. Lightweight, handy, sufficiently accurate, and very reliable, even with an optic on it. So we now have the 6 pound AR-15 from 1965, but in modern manufacturing with the ability to do modern accessories and accoutrement, lasers, lights, free float tube, excellent trigger, etc. There's more to it than that. You can watch the entire video series here on the channel. But of course, a very essential part of this was what was at one point the KE Arms Mark II polymer lower that was now being sold by GWACS. So what happened, and there's a lot of history here. Fagan, who you see on the channel here regularly, has been around this style of product for a long time. He's really one of the luminaries in the industry in regards to polymerization and monolithic polymer lowers, and that's because he started working at KE Arms way back when he was just a little Fagan. And Cav Arms ran into issues, but up until they ran into issues, they were producing initially the Mark I, which was literally held together with screws, and eventually the Mark II, which was an improved version with an A1 length of pole and better manufacturing processes. Still not optimal, but it was good, and it was a really unique product, being a monolithic polymer lower. Cav Arms failed. Eventually, they had legal issues and other issues that put them out of business. And Sean Nealon, who was the guy that actually started Cav Arms and this entire monolithic polymer lower rebirth, originally in the 1960s, Colt had a monolithic polymer lower. They just didn't have the modern manufacturing materials to make it work. But Sean Nealon brought that into the future with Cav Arms, with the Mark I and then subsequently the Mark II. At any rate, when Cav Arms failed, Russell Fagan landed up acquiring the mold to be able to manufacture the Mark II only lower receivers. So a mold is two pieces of metal that are cut out, and then you fill it with polymer. You have two halves, and then you use it as it is a mold. You literally injection present polymer into this side and then into this side, and then you have two halves of a monolithic polymer lower that are later combined. Like I said, in the Mark I, it was done with screws. The Mark II was friction welding, which is also, these manufacturing processes have been around in the world for quite a while. You see that with other existing firearms designs, like a really prominent example is the Steyr AUG. But when Cav Arms started doing this with the AR-15, they were really changing the game and doing something very unique. So anyways, Fagan acquires the mold with the idea that maybe someday he will recontinue or maybe make them again. At any rate, that didn't work out, and so he landed up selling the mold for the Cav Arms Mark II lower to GWACS Armory, and we'll get to more on that in a minute. But when this project started in 2017, it was never intended to be a commercial project. It was always intended to be DIY, do it yourself. So we would give you the components, we would tell you what we think are the right components for this build, and then you go home and make your own, build your own lower, build your own upper, all the parts and bits and baubles to do a DIY project. But of course, one of the quintessential elements to achieve the goal wholly was a monolithic polymer lower, of which there really was only one on the market. There was the Cav Arms Mark II, but at the time that we started doing the DIY project, Fagan had sold the mold to GWACS Armory, and it was now the GWACS Mark II monolithic polymer lower. So again, I want to remind everyone, this was never intended to initially be a commercial project. It was just a DIY thing. But so at one point when the project got enough attention on InRange, which it did get a lot of attention, Brownells came to InRange and said, would you be interested in trying to make this a commercial project? Initially, both Ian and myself, I don't want to speak for him, but I think we agreed on this, didn't think it was viable as a commercial project, and even said so in the videos. And the reason we thought it wasn't viable as a commercial project was because there were so many diverse manufacturers and vendors involved in one, what would Stoner do carbine. You had a GWACS polymer lower, you had a SLT1 trigger from KE Arms, you had a PDQ lever from that guy, you had a monolith, you had a free float tube from Faxon, you had a pencil barrel from Faxon, we had uppers from Aero or KE Arms. And so trying to get all of these companies together and to collaborate and work together to make a single product that would somehow benefit all of them is not how the industry works. These organizations and companies don't typically work together except in the nature of selling each other product. So someone had to be an aggregator to put all these together to manufacture one single carbine. Most companies have a few things they buy from other people, but then actually manufacture everything else in-house. So we thought it wasn't possible because we'd never get company A, B, C, D through Z to work together to make an actual complete carbine. So Brownells comes and goes, hey, you know what? We're Brownells. We are an aggregator of companies and vendors and all that. And I bet you with our buying power and ability, we can make it so that it's possible to get everybody to collaborate and actually manufacture the What Would Stoner Do carbine as a commercial project. And we had a lot of people at that time asking for a commercial version of the What Would Stoner Do carbine. They didn't necessarily have the tools or the time or the desire to build this thing at home. So they're like, can I just buy one? I really want one of these. It's a really unique gun. I'd like to buy one. So with Brownell saying that they have the ability to do the aggregation and the buying power, and we have people here saying, hey, we really want these, and Brownell's worked with us to make a 5% deal where every one of the What Would Stoner Do branded carbines would produce 5% of the profits to InRange. So it was another way to support InRange. InRange, of course, has always been no corporate overlords, no sponsors, and so completely viewer supported, patreon.com, right? So this was just another way to be, one, fulfill a market desire of people that really want to buy a What Would Stoner Do carbine, but also add some more income to the InRange coffers because that's important to keep the project alive. So that sounded like a win-win-win-win-win, quite honestly. So what's interesting is in 2017, 2018, the DIY version of this project was so successful in a video project that we actually landed up blowing out all of GWAC's existing inventory. So how this works is when you injection mold and manufacture monolithic polymer lowers, and probably lots of things at this point, you do it at a time. So you're going to set up. So in the month of February and March, we're going to make, let's just go with a stupid number, 1,000 lowers. So we're going to make 1,000 lowers because this is when you have to tool up, make your machines get running, do the injection molding, do the friction welding, clean up all the stuff, and produce these things. So you don't generally do it 24/7 around the clock. You set up a time to do all this injection molding because you have to set up the machines, gear up, etc. So at one point, GWACS had done that and had an inventory of, I don't remember how many, of their Mark II monolithic polymer lowers now under GWACS branding. And the DIY project was so successful that they thought they had years of inventory in stock, and we just blew them out. Some people in the audience bought every available GWACS Mark II polymer lower. There was no more to be had. They had no more in inventory. They even said so on their website. They posted that they're out, but that they're going to work on something, and I'll get to that more in a minute. So we blew them out. We did a big deal for them without any kind of collaboration. We weren't trying to make GWACS money. There was no sponsorship thing here. This was us just making a DIY project based on the components we thought were the best ones at the time, and one of them was that Mark II polymer lower, and we just completely sold out their entire inventory. And at that point, they now have to consider spinning up the mold in the machines to make more polymer lowers to fulfill a market demand. Well, they actually posted on the internet that their mold was, quote, worn out, and that they could not manufacture more with the mold. At any rate, they never spun the mold back up and made more Mark II GWACS lowers while the market demand was absolutely intense. And so they put something out about, we're going to make a new one someday or something, but they never actually spun it up to make more of them to fulfill the market demand. This meant that people that were trying to make What Would Stoner Do carbines were kind of scrambling, finding them on not eBay, but on Gunbroker or wherever, and paying unrealistic prices for a simple used Cav Arms or GWACS Mark II monolithic polymer lower, and that was So at this point, with there being no more of these Mark II GWACS lowers available to purchase, not for the consumer base, but also not for the What Would Stoner Do project through Brownells. So we were contacting and in direct contact with GWACS for a while. We kept talking to them in 2018. Well, actually late 2017 or through fall of 2018, trying to say, hey guys, can you work with us? We really need your polymer lower to go back into production so that we can actually make more or actually start this commercial project. But through fall of 2018, they suddenly just disappeared, went dark. GWACS wouldn't reply to emails. They never said anything. They never replied to my emails. They didn't reply to Brownells. It was like they just kind of went away. It was poof, no more GWACS. And with no more GWACS and no more Mark II polymer lowers, there goes the commercial project for the What Would Stoner Do carbine, because without the lower, the project really doesn't have the merit that it would with some other. I mean, it's a quintessential part. And so in January of 2019, GWACS actually posted that they had to vacate their building. They did this, I believe, on social media. And as a result, existing customers are angry and looking for customer service and having orders unfulfilled. In fact, some of these customers even tried to contact other people saying, hey, what can you help me with this, even though you're not GWACS? And so 2018, they go dark, they don't talk to us, they're no longer manufacturing product, we've sold all their inventory, and they even said so on their website. 2019, they actually talk about vacating their building, even though they're not replying to us. In May of 2019, the Oklahoma Secretary of State even listed the GWACS LLC as terminated, meaning it's no longer even a company. So, all right, so obviously we're not going to be getting Mark II lowers from GWACS, so what do we do now? Every indication at this point was that GWACS was a memory, and as a result, what was done to do commercial project was entirely dead in the water. Key component, the properly designed monolithic polymer lower was not available. So we, InRange, approached KE Arms about, hey, would you be interested in trying to enter the monolithic polymer market? Like, there's room here not only to fulfill an attempt to make this commercial project a success, but there's also room in the market because there's no longer anyone doing monolithic polymer lowers. And on top of that, while the GWACS, well, the original KE Arms Mark II and the GWACS Mark II was a good product, we even said in videos in 2017, it's not a perfect product. There's no such thing as a perfect product. And there was a lot of room to make a better, a completely new design for the market. So we went to them because KE Arms was already heavily involved in the project with the SLT1 trigger and uppers and such like that. And I already said this earlier, Fagan has mega years of experience with polymer lowers in general as being a previously important part of KE Arms. So KE Arms researched the R&D and what it would cost to get the machines to make this possible, and gave Brownells the estimated cost per unit as a result. KE Arms then landed up putting up together an investor group as design and cutting of the mold itself. If you don't know this, a mold for polymer injection is a very expensive process. That actual component is worth a lot of money, and you've got to do it right. You've got to mill it and design it, etc. So this investor group made it possible to move forward. I was not part of this investor group. I just couldn't afford to be. But throughout 2019 to early 2020, design and manufacturing of this mold commenced. InRange was part of the design process, and we designated a number of things that were required elements in the design. An A1 length of pull, for example, a trapdoor storage compartment, cuts for a PDQ lever, QD sockets, the angle of the pistol grip in relation to the safety, which on previous things was not optimal. A number of design components that became the KP15, but were essential to what we felt was going to be necessary to make a successful What Would Stoner Do 2020, were all part of that. So in that regard, InRange was a significant part of the design process of what we wanted this new and completely new design, What Would Stoner Do polymer lower to be. At that result, so KE took what was their initial CAD diagrams of their KE15, their aluminum K15, and then used those CADs to kind of work from, at least on the dimensional front ends, like the flared magwell, and then moved out to make it a monolithic polymer design along with InRange required statements like the A1 length to pull being very essential. And that's why you see the flared magwell on the KP15 and the What Would Stoner Do carbine. The sort of things that are required to manufacture and design a monolithic polymer lower are extensive. You need to do mold flow analysis, vibration welding, material selection, plastic. You have to get higher plastic design experts because not all plastics and polymers are equal, and you have to make sure that you're using the right one with the right percentages of this and that. A lot of people in the 3D printing community will understand this very thoroughly. The PLA you pick makes a difference. The polymer and plastic you pick for your injection molding process makes a difference. How it flows, what temperature, how it solidifies, all that stuff. And all that has to align with the intended goals and features of the product. One example was that InRange wanted captured pins. And the reality was that the material design did not lend itself to being viable without harming the integrity of lower. In fact, Ian at Forgotten Weapons just recently did a video about captured pins, if you didn't see it. And in making a monolithic polymer lower without really making some oddball design and aesthetic choices, captured pins weren't viable without harming the integrity of the strength of the pin holes. So we decided, all right, we're not going to go with captured pins. HK doesn't always go with captured pins. We can live without captured pins, but that's part of the analysis of designing the product. So at this point, KE Arms came through, and there was a brand new design of a brand new monolithic polymer lower on the market, and Brownells was able to once again recommence the commercial version of the What Would Stoner Do project. So we announced this project to the public in 2019 and SHOT Show 2020. There's cool pictures of that as well, and that was of course just before the plague. Having announced this in 2019 and SHOT Show 2020, just before the plague, so this was SHOT Show's early 2020. In April of 2020, suddenly, this company that didn't exist anymore, that had been terminated by the Secretary of State, reappears on the radar. Boom, GWACS resurfaces and demands immediately that KE Arms ceased and desist the manufacture of the KP-15 and then interfered with the business relationship for the project by including Brownells in that communication as what could only seem as what appears to be a fear tactic. So this company that was no longer able to sell product, wasn't manufacturing more product, said they couldn't manufacture more product, was defunct based on the actual Secretary of State, suddenly resurfaces and sends a cease and desist letter to KE Arms and Brownell saying, you better stop making that right now. Okay. GWACS insinuated that they would like or would want to make an agreement on the KP-15, something that they had no intellectual property rights to whatsoever. This is a completely new design. And they had allowed their already deceased Mark II that they had languished. So I don't understand why they ever thought they had the right to do this, but this is what they asserted. Not only did they let the market opportunity slide that could have been a great boon from them with the DIY 2017 project, they then threatened the entire future of the What Would Stoner Do project as a result, after InRange had not only attempted to work with them, but had done them the favor of selling their entire existing inventory. It was very hard not to see this as a situation in which, when you're a failure yourself, just become a grifter and use a janky legal system as your weapon. As a result of this churn and this cease and desist letter, InRange and Brownells really actively diminished marketing the What Would Stoner Do project in carbine because the future of it was truly at stake. Just because you're right does not mean you're going to have justice in this system. Justice is not what the legal system does. The legal system does legal stuff. And a lot of that is variable, as you have seen in our world not so recently and very recently. So to think that even though we know their claims are spurious and ridiculous, that they don't have the power to cause damage would have been unrealistic. So as a result, both InRange, me, this channel, and Brownells actively diminished marketing the carbine. The excitement of bringing this new thing to the world and to the people who wanted it was crushed under the weight of grifting legal threats. And this reduced the desire to create related content, and it was actually a choice not to, because InRange has had the sad experience, and I think anyone that does any content creation in this industry has had the sad experience of being very excited for a new project, coming to the market and highlighting them, only to become vaporware or worse. And that is not my intention with this channel ever. And I don't want to ever do that again. I mean, you've seen a couple examples of that. Quite honestly, Hudson, the reproduction STG-44, stuff that was real hype. We even went there and saw them making some of these things, and then they either took money and never sold them or did other worse things. And when you promote things that no longer make it to market because you're excited about a new design, that kind of backsplashes on you when they fail, because suddenly people see you as a trusted media source promoting vaporware. So the What Would Stoner Do project at this point was potentially vaporware. Now, we had never taken any money from anyone or any down payments or anything like that, but we had hyped up the idea at SHOT Show and etc., as well as years of the DIY project. But when this cease and desist letter came, screech, hold the brakes, don't promote this further, do not engage. Let's see where this goes, because we don't want to be the ones sitting or holding the bag about something that never ultimately comes to market. Months of negotiations happened between KE Arms and GWACS Council. Eventually, GWACS replaced their entire council and decided that to do the thing that you can't do when you can't innovate yourself, they filed a suit, an actual lawsuit against KE Arms, Russell Fagan himself, Sinistral Shooting Technologies, and Sean Nealon, the original designer and creator of the Mark I and Mark II cav arms lower. The CAV-15 and the CAV-15 Mark II, the cav arms products, were never intellectually protected in any way. Sean Nealon himself didn't think it was protectable in the way that, because of previously existing products like the 1960s Colt monolithic polymer lower and, as I mentioned earlier, the Steyr AUG. He was taking those concepts and just making them a commercial product, but did not think that they were intellectually protectable under law. This was so much the case that Sean even had pictures of him promoting it in like promotional material with the CAD schematics, the actual schematics of the monolithic polymer lower of the Mark II used in public marketing. So this was earlier before 3D printing, but if you saw that picture and the schematics on the wall behind him, you could just go, let's see if I can make one. He never thought of it to be a legally protectable idea. He just thought of it to be a commercially viable product. So my own experience with cav arms was that they were very open and about everything. They even had like parties where they would offer people, sodas and pizza to come help make the Mark II lowers. In fact, The people would come, random people that were just supporters would come and have some pizza, have some drinks, and actually run the mold machine or de-flash the polymer at the end with a razor blade. As a result, there was like random people coming and going out of the manufacturing floor and could see all of the stuff, the welding machines, the molds, the whole process. They were never discreet about how these things were manufactured or made. And so initially, GWACS alleged that there were trademark, NDA, trade dress, copyright, and trade secret violations against everyone that they enumerated in the suit. Well, I don't know how that's possible considering the openness of GWACS, or excuse me, of Cav Arms initially, right off the bat, because the GWACS product, the Mark II, was strictly the mold purchased from Fagan, which was the mold used at Cav Arms. They didn't make their own mold. They just bought the mold and ran it to make product and then rebranded it GWACS. They didn't design the mold, they didn't cut the mold, they didn't do anything besides buy the mold to manufacture more of it. So over a year into this lawsuit, this is all going on right now. We're not heavily promoting the What Would Stoner Do project because why would we with this legal threat? Over a year into the suit, they dropped all their claims for copyright, trademark, and trade dress. After 2 years into this, they finally deposed me personally. Now, this has been going on in the background for a while, and finally they sent a deposition to me, meaning I have to go into a room and essentially testify or give a deposition, not testify, that's not the right word, give a deposition to their counsel when they ask me questions and vice versa. The deposition was ridiculous. They were attempting to make claims and have me tell them that things like the A1 length of pull, that trapdoor storage compartments in a buttstock, and that QD sockets and QD slings were proprietary to the GWACS lower. They literally tried to make the claim that A1 length of pull, thing from the original AR-15, was a proprietary thing that they owned with the GWACS Mark II just because they bought a mold from Russell that was originally the mold from Cav Arms that was the A1 length of pull because they were actually using the correct and most appropriate length of pull that was already figured out by Stoner and others on the original AR-15 and M16 and M16A1. So they tried to say the A1 length of pull being used on the new KP-15 is indicative of of violations against our intellectual property that they don't even own. They also tried to say like a trapdoor storage compartment is, and that QD sockets were. And in this deposition, I told them this was patently absurd, and that, for example, the A1 length of pull existed in Stoner's original design, and that trapdoor storage compartments could be found on the 1860 Henry from the American Civil War, and that QD slings were used in the Revolutionary War. I was scheduled for 8 hours of this deposition, and what only could be described in a rage quit 1.5 hours into this, as our counsel is the better term, started asking me like counter questions. They literally started noisily putting their papers in a bag and rage quit and walked out of the room. They just walked out of the room like, boom, we're done, bye. 8 hours of scheduled conversation and deposition, 1.5 hours into it, when I tell them the A1 length of pull is historically associated with the original AR-15, that QD sockets existed in the Revolution, or QD slings existed in the Revolutionary War, and that the 1860 Henry Civil War era rifle had a trapdoor compartment, meaning there's no possible way that any of that is some form of proprietary intellectual property. They just literally shoveled their stuff into a bag, made it so noisy it could barely talk, and they walked out of the room. Thus ends the deposition of Carl Casarda in regards to the GWACS lawsuit. And what was funny about this is this, not funny in a ha-ha way. This lawsuit turned what could have been a positive, fun commercial project into a fight for survival. It still is a fight for survival, and we had to commence some form of marketing again to promote the product, not because we wanted to make sales to, make cool stuff, which we do, and make some money for InRange, etc., and everyone involved, but we had to now start promoting the product, not to promote the product, but to fund legal defenses against GWACS, which was odd because they were defunct and their financial ability to spend this much on a lawsuit seemed odd. The suit threatened not only the future of the What Would Stoner Do project, but KE Arms itself. So at this point, we're now start relaunching marketing because we've been doing diminished or almost no marketing because why? And now we start doing marketing because we have to make money to bring in income for KE Arms to be able to legally defend themselves, literally sell the product, take the profit, don't use the profit to put it in the legal coffers to fight these grifters. That's what this turned into. And here's the thing. Due to my long-standing career in information security, this really felt honestly familiar. I'd seen this sort of thing before, and I couldn't help but think that they had found, given that we knew their financial situation was not good, I couldn't help but think that they had found an angel investor and had convinced someone to fund this lawsuit. Turned out to be correct. In further depositions, it turned out they were being funded by the big pockets of a Tulsa business guy named Reed Oppenheimer. He was part of their original investor group that had purchased the CAV mold in 2011, which is how they had money to do that at all, and he has his hands in many business ventures. Eventually, they deposed Oppenheimer himself, this angel investor who was just like investing in multiple businesses and ventures across whatever. And during the deposition, he made pretty flagrant anti-AR-15 and military-style firearms comments. In fact, he stated that he was no longer interested in manufacturing or being associated with the manufacture of any AR-15 product or military-style firearms, but was willing to continue to fund the lawsuit against KE et al. So Reed Oppenheimer, who is their angel investor, the guy that's making it possible for them to do this grifting lawsuit, says under deposition that he is not interested in manufacturing AR-15s or military-style firearms for civilian ownership. So if they're suing about the supposed property rights of the CAV arms / now GWACS Mark II lower in relation to the completely new designed KP-15, they don't have a right to do that, but if that's their cause, what is it they're trying to acquire if it isn't to manufacture more or a new monolithic polymer lower, if the person investing in them flat out says that he is against AR-15s and military-style firearms in the civilian hands? So that's real interesting. Here's my interpretation. Your mileage may vary. This could be just a financial grift because they're failures. They're failures. They know they're failures. They know they can never succeed. They know they'll never succeed with anything they try to do. So when you can't succeed, sue. That's the American way. That's one possible. I'm not saying that is the answer. I'm saying that's one possible interpretation. Another possible interpretation is they legitimately just want to diminish the amount of AR-15s available on the market as some form of activism in a very weird back-end way. Like Oppenheimer's like, I don't want AR-15s in commercial hands or in consumer hands, so if I do this, maybe we can make some money and we can reduce the amount of AR-15s on the market. I don't know, but his comments don't necessarily not lend themselves to that. Or it could be that they just really believe that they own the A1 length of pull, trapdoor buttstocks, QD swivels, and they think they own what was Stoner do as a project, which I coined as a phrase in my backyard in 2017. At the filming of this, the lawsuit continues. Whatever their reason is, they've done immense harm to no benefit to us, to the industry, or to you, the consumer. Thanks for watching.